Hello and welcome to Career Atoms. This is the first of two videos that will provide you with all the easy to follow steps and guidance you'll need to produce a great CV that will be head and shoulders above others, thus significantly improving your chances of being invited for interview. Over almost the past quarter of a century, I've been supporting job hunters, professionally writing CVs and recruiting for a vast array of different job disciplines across 5 continents and at all levels, right from graduates through to the boardroom. In so doing, I've formulated some critical elements that underpin a great CV or resume. And I believe these pretty much apply universally across most job functions and levels. Whilst there's a lot of CV writing advice online, it's often of variable quality and some of the most critical info is unfortunately held back, prompting you to have to pay for a CV writing service. Whereas my aim is to freely provide you with all the very best guidance necessary to be able to produce a document that's really indistinguishable from one that's been professionally written and perhaps cost you many hundreds of pounds. It will admittedly take some time and effort on your part, but in reality, the DIY writing process will save you some money. It will provide valuable insight that will help when it comes to interviews, and importantly, it will also allow you to more easily tailor your CV to each specific application, which is something that's easily and often overlooked when you pay someone else to write it for you. At the end of the day, no one else cares or knows about your career quite as much as you do. So I'd always recommend that you take full ownership of the CV writing or updating process. Plus, it's a really useful skill to learn, which will pay dividends over and over again. I'm certain that regardless of whether this is your first attempt or whether you already feel pretty adept, the principles outlined will give your CV much more impact and really elevate it to the next level. It's important to firstly make sure that your perspective of a CV fully aligns with that of a recruiter or hiring manager. Otherwise, you'll waste time writing unnecessary stuff and inadvertently hinder your chances of success. So the first principle I want to outline is that your CV should be a concise pitch. It's not meant to be a life story or a hugely detailed history of your entire career. With potentially hundreds of applicants to sift through for each role, rather than spending 10 to 15 minutes reading your whole CV line for line and word for word, in reality, a recruiter will quickly glance over it, literally for just a few seconds, before deciding whether to continue reading it further or move on to the next one. In essence, they want to, as quickly as possible, identify your potential alignment to their role opening and the value you can bring. In which case, the entire structure, appearance and wording of the CV should be designed to showcase and guide them to what they're after. Think about how products are marketed to consumers. Rather than providing pages and pages of all the detailed minutiae product and technical information, what's actually highlighted are much snappier sound bites about product uniqueness, benefits and advantages. Your CV needs to do likewise. Here's an example of a great CV that's been designed and optimised to more easily provide a recruiter with what they need. We'll pull this apart in detail, section by section, and incidentally, if it makes life easier, you can obviously freely download a copy of this as well as the underlying blank template and instructions on the Career Atoms website. A one-page CV will probably suffice if you're an apprentice, graduate or at a much earlier stage of your career. Similarly, if you can otherwise accommodate everything you need to on a single page, and taking it beyond this just means adding fluff, stick with the single page. For most people, however, the CV will be 2 pages, and this is now widely regarded as the norm. Exceptions to this may be those who work in academia, science or research, where lists of publications, papers and conferences may also be expected. Also, those who work in the arts industries may require a portfolio alongside a different CV format. What you can see on the screen, however, will suit the vast majority of other disciplines. Now, I appreciate that some, with existing CVs longer than 2 pages, may be wondering how potentially trimming 1, 2 or even more pages will make it any better. Again, it comes down to a mindset shift away from I need to document everything I've done, rather towards what is the recruiter looking for and how can I best convey this as succinctly as possible. If you follow the principles I'm going to be outlining in this and the next video, 2 pages really should be enough. Any more and you begin to lessen the document's impact. And I guarantee that when a recruiter opens a longer CV, their immediate knee-jerk reaction isn't positive. So within 1 to 2 seconds, you're already on the back foot potentially. The longest CV I've seen was 18 pages, which is frankly just rude. A quick true story. A gentleman with a 10-page CV once defiantly declared to me, that with such an extensive, almost 30-year career history, it was going to be impossible to get the CV any shorter than 5 or 6 pages, despite also freely admitting to me that he wasn't getting invited for any interviews whatsoever. Even though I explained to him that all the CVs I've written for CEOs with similar levels of experience were also 2 pages, he just wasn't having it. And as we talked it through further, it became clear that he'd developed what I call a CV hoarding mentality, meaning he struggled with the idea of skipping over certain aspects of prior work experience. And that in his mind, somehow, by not mentioning stuff in huge detail, it negated his employment periods and achievements. His whole approach was to write a much more autobiographical CV, a complete employment life story. So I had to get him to appreciate that whilst a lot of this prior experience was certainly invaluable in shaping him and his career, from a recruiter's point of view, its detailed inclusion across literally whole pages of his CV was ultimately undermining him, and he either had to let it go completely or at least aggregate it down to a condensed couple of very concise bullet points. He somewhat reluctantly took the latter option. We cut the CV to 2 pages, and as you can probably imagine, there was a positive outcome. Don't be afraid to amalgamate, aggregate, or completely leave off much older, less relevant employment experience. Be scrupulous and ruthless to ensure every line and word of your CV serves a purpose and is helping the reader quickly find what they're looking for. Adjust the thought process from how can I possibly convey everything I've done in just 2 pages to I have 2 whole pages to show the reader I should be hired. What succinct info will best persuade them? The initial split-second first impression of a CV can make a huge difference. I'll very briefly fire up 3 other versions of the CV I showed a few moments ago, and without even reading any words, just consider your immediate impressions. Hopefully you recoiled from the appearance of misaligned bullet points, inconsistent styling, faddish fonts and large blocks of text. Contrast again with the original CV where the immediate impression given is that of clarity, conciseness, quality and professionalism. You need to make sure that before even any word of your CV is read, the recruiter similarly feels positive the moment they open the document. If you do this, you're already ahead of at least half of the rest of the candidate pool. Here's some straightforward formatting principles that you should adopt. Some fancy CV templates that you can download or buy online have obviously been designed on the basis of style over substance. Unless you are a designer, anything with faddish, unique or quirky stuff like exotic pattern borders, photos and fancy charts etc. should be completely avoided. The best templates are much more straightforward. They're not too busy, which is tiring on the eye, but they also don't leave too much empty white space, which is often wasted space. They simply allow the substance of the CV to shine, which is what recruiters want. I used my current personal favourite, Calibri, in the example of a great CV, and it provides a very modern, clean look. But you can use others, of course. In a recent poll of recruiters, these were deemed to be the top 8 CV fonts. Times New Roman used to be the most commonly seen, but to my eye it now looks a little dated. Not surprisingly perhaps, because Calibri was released in 2005, whilst Times New Roman goes all the way back to 1931. It is personal choice, however, just as long as the document is clear and easily readable. Actual font size is somewhat dependent upon the particular font you use, but with Calibri I prefer 11. You could potentially get away with going down to 10 if the document is well structured, but definitely don't go below this, especially recognising that sometimes your CV could be viewed on a mobile. Never sacrifice readability in order to make everything fit into the 2 pages. Font size 12 is also feasible, but looks a shade too big to my eye. And you also might then risk struggling to fit everything into 2 pages. Headings should be slightly larger font size, and I've used size 13. Whatever you use, stick with it, and do double check because it's quite easy for rogue fonts to slip in, especially if you're copy and pasting from prior CVs. I don't like CVs which have a whole bunch of keywords highlighted in bold throughout the CV. To me, this just looks messy. Keep it simple and straightforward. If you use a good template and it's well written, the recruiter will easily be able to pick out what they need. I've also put some additional formatting information in the FAQ section on the website. Bullets make it much easier to draw the recruiter's eye to key info as opposed to using large blocks of text and long paragraphs. But again, don't go overboard with these. Remember, sometimes less is more. Compare these two CVs. If you have, say, 10 or more bullets for a particular role, some of the points and emphasis will naturally be lost as the recruiter's eyes scan over it. 3 to 5 really good bullets for each position makes it a lot easier to pull out critical info. In the second CV video, I'll further demonstrate how your precise sentence structure and word order of each bullet point can also make a big difference. But for now, simply ensure that the recruiter is quickly drawn to the positive impact you've made in each role and help them appreciate how you'll make life better for a new employer. A couple of final points on the subject of appearance. First, note that on the CV, I've segmented the various sections with simple page breaks. It's not a major thing and it's not crucial, but I just think it helps to more easily distinguish the various sections. There's also no set rule when it comes to margins, so use whatever looks best. I've used 2 centimetres on the left and right sides with 1 centimetre at the top and bottom, but you could also narrow the sides down to about 1.5 centimetres and this still looks fine. Let's now begin to go through the various CV sections, starting right at the top of the page. Don't use up a lot of valuable space, and there's no need to title it with the words curriculum vitae or CV. Forget fancy graphics and weird fonts, ridiculously oversized text, every single given name, which just lessens impact and reduces the chances of the recruiter remembering you, or tons of letters after your name, which, unless you work in academia, research or scientific fields, may just look a little bit pretentious. There's no mystery at all here, just keep it very simple, concise and clear. I prefer to include brief outline location info like a town, city and postcode, rather than a full detailed home address. Then of course a mobile phone number and email address. If you normally use what you might imagine as a fun or quirky email address, ditch it from the CV and just get another free one from Gmail that looks much more professional. It's not mandatory, but it probably helps if you also include a link to your LinkedIn page to make it easier for any recruiters that wish to look you up there. Plus it gives an immediate impression that you're a modern job hunter. Often your LinkedIn URL will include a bunch of random numbers and letters, and because you ideally want it to be a simple first and last name, you can actually customize the link by navigating to your LinkedIn profile online. Go to View Profile, click on Edit Public Profile in URL, which is in the top right hand side, then click on the small pencil outline next to your URL to customize it. Also, don't include a photo, nationality, date of birth, marital or health status or anything else that may well have been the convention a number of years ago, but it isn't expected or desirable now. I'm going to skip on the career summary and career highlights sections for now, as they're just so absolutely critical they demand separate focused discussion, which I'll cover in detail in the second CV video. Suffice at this point to say that the top portion of page 1 of your CV is the high-value prime shop window, because this is the key area that the recruiter's eyes are naturally immediately drawn to. And it's here that they'll be able to pull out some of the key elements that will determine if you'll be invited for interview. As such, what you put there is absolutely vital. For this reason, don't include your education and qualifications section near the top of page 1. It's much better to place it at the bottom of the CV on page 2, since recruiters aren't likely to be swayed by just strong academic credentials alone. And when you include it at the top, you're automatically relegating some other, more important things. If you're desperate to highlight a fantastic degree, PhD or MBA gained at a leading institution, there is a way you can more subtly throw it into the mix sooner, which I'll highlight in the next video. With this section, try to keep it brief rather than list every single thing you've ever done, especially if you also now have a number of years of work experience under your belt. You don't need to include every extensive list of every training course you've ever attended, and definitely steer away from including stuff that's of no relevance to the job you're going for. A first aid certificate and scout badges perhaps won't improve your standing for a sales and marketing manager role, and it will rather act as a turn-off because you'll look desperate. If you're at an early stage of your career, you'll probably need to provide more qualifications detail here, potentially including individual subjects studied and resulting grades. Alternatively, even on graduate level CVs, it's fine to more succinctly summarise like this. Conversely, with a greater level of experience, you may just want to briefly highlight the highest level of study and any professional work qualifications. It's also fine if you'd prefer not to specify when you studied. particularly if this helps ensure there's no conscious or indeed unconscious ageism bias from the recruiter. Put simply, start with your most recent experience and work backwards. All recruiters and hiring managers will naturally want to first of all know what you've been up to most recently. So writing a CV in a different order is just an annoyance for a recruiter, and it potentially wastes precious time as they struggle to pull out what they need. Occasionally we see CVs that are functionally formatted, aligning experience with a number of functional areas like this. I would say it's best to avoid this approach because it actually makes it harder for the recruiter to find and pull out what they need. Plus, there's often the suspicion that the CV's been created in a manner to mask employment chronology, precisely because there are some things to hide. Avoid introducing any doubt or suspicion. With regards to the best way to format your employer, job title and date info, again, keep it simple to save space and make it super easy for the recruiter to pull out what they need. This example is just too busy and detailed, whereas this is what I would prefer. You may also need to think carefully about your job title. Whilst you obviously shouldn't lie and make something up that isn't truthful, you may need to apply some level of artistic license for two reasons. First of all, sometimes the formal title on your employment contract doesn't necessarily align with a popular convention used by others. For example, the actual content of your personnel officer titled role may be exactly aligned with what you'd expect from a HR business partner position, but the former title sounds old-fashioned and may therefore not be perceived as positively if that's what you call yourself on the CV. Secondly, you may need the job title on your CV to better align with a particular job title used for an advertised position in order to get past the applicant tracking system or ATS. I'll talk some more about the ATS in the next CV video. Suffice at this point to say that these days there is a chance your CV won't actually be reviewed by a human. So you've got to ensure that your CV is optimised to get past the potential computer-based screening that will simply assess your CV based on how it matches against a series of keywords and other elements. If this is news to you, you definitely need to watch the part 2 video, as there could be quite a simple reason as to why you've not perhaps been invited to interview for roles you really thought that you should have been. Regarding employment dates, if you remember the months you started and finished in previous roles as well as the years, that's absolutely fine. But if not, it's okay to just use the years themselves for your earliest positions. You'll ideally want to include both months and years in most recent positions so as to demonstrate continuity and not perhaps inadvertently give recruiters the impression that you've just used years to try and cover up any more recent gaps that they should be concerned about. Just on this, if there are any gaps that need to be justified, the insertion of a very simple and concise one-line sentence will suffice. Next, you should have a 1 or 2 line quick summary of the employer and your role. This is especially important if you didn't work for a much more recognised household name. The recruiter will simply want to quickly understand what the employer does, their size, their markets, etc. Definitely keep this very brief and to the point. And then we come to the individual bullets that highlight what you've done and achieved. And because these deserve critical focus, we'll go through them in detail in part 2. This is how you can best format the CV when you've had multiple roles with the same employer. You definitely want to demonstrate progression, and if you held a couple of positions, you can demarcate these, but what if you held 4 or 5 distinct positions over a number of years with the same employer? If you stick to the aforementioned format and isolate and include every single role, alongside individual bullets, etc., it might start to threaten the length of your CV. So here it's best to simply focus more detail on your most recent 1 or 2 roles that are of more relevance, and then summarise the others like this. It should really be self-evident, but you wouldn't believe how many times I see CVs with lots of spelling errors, and sometimes these are quite glaringly obvious. I've even had incorrectly spelled names, email addresses and phone numbers, clearly missing digits. On more than one occasion I've also seen these, which raises a chuckle, before the CV is of course quickly binned. So once you've completed your CV, read it through again and again and again. In fact, review and scrutinise it more times than you think you really need to, and then do it again. It's surprising how many times you can actually miss something important, which might perhaps only become apparent on the 9th or 10th review, or even more. It also helps to have someone else check it over for you. Definitely use a spell checker. The one in Microsoft Word is fine, but another that I really like is called Grammarly. Visit their application on their website, and whilst you can purchase a premium spelling and grammar tool, I find that the free version is really good at highlighting potential issues that might have been missed. Lastly for today, I wouldn't advise including an interest section, since unless you're an acclaimed Olympian or you've summited Everest multiple times, it's unlikely to be that pertinent or impressive. A recruiter simply won't care that you enjoy socialising with friends and family, you like watching sports, enjoy baking and have an 18-month-old hamster called Gerald who likes nothing more than eating carrots and burrowing in your slippers. You think I'm joking about this, but really you wouldn't believe some of the stuff that we see written. Keep it off the CV, it's of no relevance to your ability to do a great job. Similarly, you don't need to include any names of referees, or even the often used expression at the end of a CV, references available upon request, which is just a pretty redundant phrase, because of course you'll provide these at a later stage if requested. I also see lots of CVs nowadays copying glowing written references from LinkedIn recommendations. In my experience, these are simply ignored, so it's better just to leave them off. The key elements themselves of a well-written, great CV should do all the selling that you need. Most CVs will end with a brief education and qualifications section. However, I'm aware that some people may also have some other things that they really want to highlight, such as perhaps some voluntary or intern experience, some foreign language expertise, sitting on a non-profit board, or perhaps some non-work specific awards like the Duke of Edinburgh. It's fine to include an additional section right at the very bottom of the CV, and you can simply call it additional information or extracurricular activity. The key thing I would say here is to very honestly ask yourself, does this directly pertain to the job in question? And if not, does it perhaps in some way provide a really important perspective on me as an applicant? If it doesn't do either of these things, you may be better just leaving it off. This now concludes the first part of writing a great CV. Thanks very much for watching, and please do catch the second CV video where I'll be highlighting 5 more crucial elements that will really help your CV to shine.